Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. There's a proposal to eliminate the property tax. Is a Washington, D.C. real estate crash upon us? Then a terrific guest and I are talking about the future of interest rates and inflation. And finally, an event you won't want to miss, all today on Get Rich Education.
Since 2014, the powerful Get Rich Education podcast has created more passive income for people than nearly any other show in the world. This show teaches you how to earn strong returns from passive real estate investing in the best markets without losing your time being a flipper or landlord. Show host Keith Weinhold writes for both Forbes and Rich Dad Advisors and delivers a new show every week. Since 2014, there's been millions of listener downloads in 188 world nations. He has A-list show guests include top-selling personal finance author Robert Kiyosaki. Get Rich Education can be heard on every podcast platform, plus it has its own dedicated Apple and Android listener phone apps. Build wealth on the go with Get Rich Education Podcast. Sign up now for the Get Rich Education Podcast or visit GetRichEducation.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Fort Carson, Colorado to Carson City, Nevada, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold, and you are in for another wealth-building week at Get Rich Education. I don't like to predict interest rates because it's really hard to do, but it does get interesting today because our guest says that he will, with his tight read on the economy. This is a unique time, perhaps in my entire life, where we have more new policies shaping the economy and real estate than any time I can remember. Policies are made by politicians, but we don't get into the politics here, rather the policies and how it affects you. And are any of these policies spicier than this one from earlier this month? Be mindful that this voice is from a person that made his name as a real estate investor.
I also have a message tonight for the incredible people of Greenland. We strongly support your right to determine your own future. And if you choose, we welcome you into the United States of America. We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security. And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it. We will keep you safe. We will make you rich, and together we will take Greenland to heights like you have never thought possible before. It's a very small population, but very, very large piece of land and very, very important.
Yes, the longtime New York City real estate investor there has gone well beyond Gotham now with plans to expand America's real estate empire, if you will. Is this imperialism or America First policy, or is it abject comedy? I guess that it could be all three. I'll let you decide. Well, federal policy shakeups like that, also what they seem to be doing are emboldening others, including at the state level, where Florida, interestingly, recently proposed eliminating the property tax, taking it to zero. Well, is property tax-free real estate coming to you as well? Let's look at the prospects for this and what the effects would be of eliminating the property tax with some things that you probably never thought about before. And yes, your mind might shoot ahead. You might anticipate saving thousands in lost tax dollars every year, even saving over $10,000 a year per single family home in high tax areas. And, property tax's sharpest critics, they say, you have got to get rid of this thing because you basically just endlessly rent your house from the government and the rent goes up every year. And so therefore it's like forever rent that you have to pay. What's even worse is that the amount of property tax you pay is based on your home's or your apartment building's market value. Well, because the government prints so much money and creates inflation, that pumps up all the housing values, many of which are fake inflated gains, and then your property tax goes up based on this phantom gain. And we've really seen that over the last 5 years, both real gains and phantom gains. And then, plus, of course, each full dollar that you earn from your work right now is already taxed, say down to just 70 cents is what you've got left over. Well, then your 70 cents is further whittled down by property tax and all the other taxes that you have to pay out of that. Currently, all 50 states have a property tax, every one of them. And you might already know that property taxes, they're basically highest in really two main places. When we look at property taxes, a percent of your income, those places are Texas and the Northeast, where they're upwards of 4%, even 5%. In fact, it's more than 5% of your income every year that goes to property tax in the state of Maine, but it's 4% or more in a number of states. And of course, if you don't pay them every single year until you die, the government will repossess your home from you. And almost 5 million Americans lose their home every year, many of them to this tax foreclosure. And in the U.S., the property owner pays the property tax, of course, but effectively renters do too, because as landlords, we pass it along to tenants. It's embedded in that market rent amount. All right, well, can we end the property tax? Well, former presidential candidates like Ron Paul and Herman Cain have proposed it. They didn't get elected. Texas has discussed it a lot. But yeah, it's Florida that has newly and boldly proposed eliminating the property tax. And like falling dominoes, if this gets abolished in one state, it increases the chances that more will follow. And Florida is a big state, the third largest in population. Well, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis came out and said this: taxing land and property is the more oppressive and ineffective form of taxation. That's what he said. Now, let me tell you why he says that before we look at the chances that property tax will be eliminated. DeSantis says it's oppressive because, look, see, you can personally dodge your income tax by making your paycheck smaller, although that might not be desirable, you sure could. And you can certainly avoid sales tax by consuming less. But see, there is no escape from property tax. That's the oppression that's being referred to here. Let me tell you where we're at with eliminating the property tax and then what the absolutely titanic impacts of this would be. DeSantis goes on to say, property taxes are local, not state. So we'd need to do a constitutional amendment, which requires 60% of voters to approve it, to eliminate them, which DeSantis supports, even to reform or lower them. Right, but he goes on to say this, and here we go. We should put the boldest amendment on the ballot that has a chance of getting that 60%. That's the end of the quote. Okay, so that's what it's going to take to eliminate property tax in Florida, where if it happens, it could be a model for other states to follow, like we're seeing a little bit with the zero income tax states. All right, here's what I think would happen if they were eliminated. First, home affordability would massively improve, skyrocketing property values. So many more people could afford the lowered monthly payment without property tax, making prices soar, especially the values of lower price to median priced homes. They could really bring those into the affordability range. And they are the exact ones that make the best rental properties. What about rents? If property taxes went to zero, rents would stay stable. Landlords would do little or nothing to drop them. That's just how it works when people are already used to paying a certain price. Also, population influx to the affected area. I mean, that population influx, that already works for states in attracting residents that have zero state income tax. It would with property tax too. I mean, that would clearly be desirable for people to own property tax-free homes, especially in the beginning before this settles in and those home prices soar. Also, retiree financial relief would take place. Those people on fixed incomes would really be helped. But you know what would not happen with governments slashed property tax revenue? They couldn't reduce their spending proportionally. I have no faith that they could. So they would have to get their income from elsewhere. And see, shifting away from property tax over to beefing up your sales tax, that would hurt poor people the most. For example, in Florida's case, it's been studied and they discovered they would have to increase their sales tax from the current 6% up to 12% to maintain the same services. Can you imagine 12% sales tax? And another effect of abolished property tax is that wealth inequality would widen because the property owners are the ones that benefit the most. So those are the big effects. But look, there are more problems. Eliminating property tax, that means that areas would need to find another way to pay for schools and roads and parks and local services like police and emergency responders. Maybe some of that stuff could be privatized. But if that were just shifted away from local government and that went toward state and federal government, well, then local control would be lost. So that is a really undesirable side effect. But as a real estate investor, come on, the prospect of an abolished property tax, that has got to excite you. I wouldn't count on it happening anytime soon. But now you know more about the prospects for it happening and what the impact would be with an elimination of property tax. Coming up soon here on the GRE podcast, what the Bible says about money when Pastor John joins us. It's going to be a show unlike any we've ever done before and maybe will ever do again. You might not be a Christian or religious at all, but this is still relevant to you because the Bible is the top-selling book in the history of the world, and it has an indelible influence on the people around you. The book, the Bible, says some things that make you wonder if wealth accumulation is even virtuous. We're going to face those verses head on and get Pastor John's insights there. That's a really anticipated show. I'm also going to ask him what other religions have to say about money. Also, some well-known guests down the road here on the show, including the Get Rich Education debut of Laurel Langemeyer and more. Laurel, she was known as the Millionaire Maker since back in the days when $1 million was actually a lot of money. To be sure that you don't miss these upcoming episodes on your podcatching device, hit the follow button right now while it's on your mind, and you'll be all set. Let's meet with this week's guest. This week's guest is a familiar one because he's on Team GRE. Yeah, it's an in-house chat with our super helpful investment coach. What he does is he helps you devise your big picture real estate strategy all the way down to connecting you with the exact right property addresses. He does that free at GRE Marketplace. Business speaker Jim Rohn said, "Formal education will make you a living. Self-education will make you a fortune." He's got both with an MBA from Duke. Then he worked at both banks and financial publishing companies before landing here at GRE in 2021. But importantly, for years now, he's been an active real estate investor, just like you and I are. Hey, a big welcome back to the show, Naresh Vissa.
Keith, thanks for that wonderful, amazing introduction. And thanks for having me back on. It's been a few months.
Yeah, we haven't heard from you since October here. So what's going on in the real estate and economics world from your vantage point? Everyone's got a different slant on it based on what they see.
There's a lot happening, as you know, Keith, and our listeners, I'm not sure if they're following, but we're seeing tremendous changes in the financial markets in general. And the financial markets include the real estate markets, and the impact is going to be widespread for better or for worse. I think for better over the long haul. So what I'm talking about right now is, for example, interest rates, mortgage rates, home values, inflation. Those are all very important parts of the economy. And we have this new government department called DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And Doge has gone in, and I loved your newsletter where you talked about Doge a little bit, and the walk that I took, as like you called it, the awkward walk with a box full of your stuff or something like that.
Sure, because I've been fired before.
Yep. It's happened to me once too. I took the awkward walk with the box of random stuff.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of layoffs are happening within the government. The private sector continues to lay off people as well, like it usually does. And this is a big deal. The reason why it's a big deal is because aggregate demand, I don't want to say it will be killed, but we're already seeing an impact on home values in places that are very dependent on government workers, places like Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland. There's actually a 10% year-on-year decline in home values in those areas. I don't know if you knew about that, Keith, but that's been the impact, and that's based off of the February statistics, the February numbers. So we've seen a decline, and that decline will likely spread to other areas that are dependent on federal workers, or where federal workers make up a good chunk of the local economy. I bring this up because we have providers in Maryland who we work with, who GRE has worked with for 3 or 4 years now. And they're seeing somewhat of a decline in the area as well, because just you don't have to work in DC to be a federal worker. You can work in a major city like Baltimore or in a suburb in between Baltimore and DC. So we're seeing somewhat of a decline, and our investors have all of a sudden gotten interested in investment property in the Maryland area because they knew, hey, we know GRE works in the Baltimore, operates in the Baltimore area, and just want to scope out some homes. So previously, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when list price was not negotiable, now all of a sudden the sellers are open to offers when there was no budging on offers 3 years ago. So I bring this up because the Department of Government Efficiency, I believe, to my knowledge, we're up to six figures. More than 100,000 workers have either been laid off or taken the buyout package. So we're somewhere in the six figures of people who got that. Now, they do have 8 month severance, but with that being said, you would think that most humans, they'll immediately start looking for the next job. They're not going to just enjoy for 8 months and then scramble to find that next job. So this is having a widespread impact on housing, home values, on it's going to have an impact on interest rates. We're seeing that interest rates are coming down. And if there's any sign, which I don't think there is, but if there's any sign of a recession, if there's any sign of bleeding, then the Fed is going to start cutting interest rates again. So I think we saw peak interest rates a few months ago. Those interest rate values, those mortgage rates aren't going to be going back up anytime soon. We know that it's almost a fact that we know that, because the Fed is not going to be raising rates. The most punishing thing they can do is just keep rates steady for a long period of time. But I'd anticipate that later this year, they're going to start cutting again because of these widespread mass layoffs.
And of course, Washington, D.C. is essentially ground zero for these federal layoffs. Federal jobs account for about 25% of D.C. jobs. You, the listener, probably find it to be no surprise that that is the highest in the nation. But of course, this can also affect private companies, those private companies that have federal government contracts as well. And Naresh, before we open it up to the nation, we just think about DC. Do we have any idea of what properties are going to be hurt the most? A lot of times we might think of that in the case of what is the income range of these federal employees that are being laid off. Now, a lot of them are probationary employees, meaning that they're in their first year of employment.
Well, it's a huge mix, Keith. That's a really good question, because I think a broker, like a real estate broker who's trying to sell, will try to beef up the price and say, oh, this doesn't affect us and this only affects very high income folks. Well, that's the fact of the matter is, if you work for the federal government, you're not necessarily ultra high income or ultra high net worth. You get the perks, and you get perks of working a government civil servant job while taking somewhat of a lower pay. So it's actually a mix because you have people in the first 2 years of employment, so the youngsters. Now, those aren't your homeowners, though. The 22, 23, 24, let's just say the people in their mid-20s, they're not the homeowners, they're the renters. So you can expect them to leave. They'll probably, if they can't find a job, which it's going to be much harder to find a job in that DC area, they may move to Philadelphia or New York or California or wherever that they can find a job. They'll just get up and move. And that's one of the benefits. I did that when I was in my early and mid 20s many times, where I just packed up and moved. I was more than happy to do it. So they're not your homeowners, but the homeowners are going to be the people who are getting laid off. So there are mass layoffs happening right now, and those people are homeowners. And then the people who are taking the buyout packages, very likely because they're either approaching or at retirement age. And it remains to be seen whether those people, it's like a retirement gift, like, hey, this is a great parting, getting 8 months of free pay. Like, that's pretty amazing, and happy retirement. Or maybe folks were like, they didn't save for retirement all that much and they were planning to work another 10 years. Those are the people who could be sellers. Bottom line is, when you have this amount of mass layoffs, and we're seeing it in the data, there are more homes for sale today in that DMV area. By the way, I used to live there. I used to live in Maryland.
Great.
There are more homes for sale today than I believe in definitely over the last 5 years, and it could be even over the last 15 years, to my knowledge.
And for those that don't know, DMV, that means Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, that area.
Yep. So there are more homes for sale, and the home values actually are now, this is the crazy thing, the home values on average are back at 2020 levels. So basically the peak of 2020 is what the home values are at today. And just my prediction, I don't think it takes a genius to predict this, but the layoffs are just getting started. They're just scratching the surface, and they're going to continue because this DOGE is an 18-month program or an 18-month project. It was called the Manhattan Project of our time. So they're just scratching the surface, and I'd expect home values in those areas to continue to fall. And you're going to see it's not immediate. It's not like there are mass layoffs one day and then home values fall the next month. A lot of these effects, we won't start seeing them, or the DC area won't start seeing them 6, 7, 8 months down the road.
Doge is more than just a meme coin now. Our own in-house investment coach, Naresh and I are talking about the state of real estate today. More when we come back, including Naresh's thoughts on the future direction of inflation. This is Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. You know what's crazy? Your bank is getting rich off of you. The average savings account pays less than 1%. It's like laughable. Meanwhile, if your money isn't making at least 4%, you're losing to inflation. That's why I started putting my own money into the FFI Liquidity Fund. It's super simple. Your cash can pull in up to 8% returns, and it compounds. It's not some high-risk gamble like digital or AI stock trading. It's pretty low risk because they've got a 10-plus year track record of paying investors on time, in full, every time. I mean, I wouldn't be talking about it if I wasn't invested myself. You can invest as little as $25K, and you keep earning until you decide you want your money back. No weird lockups or anything like that. So if you're like me and tired of your liquid funds just sitting there doing nothing, check it out. Text FAMILY to 66866 to learn about Freedom Family Investments Liquidity Fund. Again, text FAMILY to 66866. Hey, you can get your mortgage loans at the same place where I get mine, at Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. They've provided our listeners with more loans than any provider in the entire nation because they specialize in income properties. They help you build a long-term plan for growing your real estate empire with leverage. You can start your pre-qualification and chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. Start now while it's on your mind at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is author Jim Rickards. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. It's an in-house chat with our own GRE investment coach, Naresh Vissa. He's been talking about the fallout on D.C. area jobs with the regime shakeup that we had in the White House starting earlier this year. And Naresh, I know that you have some thoughts about what this can do to the future direction of inflation. Tell us about it.
Well, the first thing, Keith, is if you look throughout history or even your lifetime, what we saw from 2021 until today, really, because inflation is going up. I don't want to say it's going back up, but it is going up. We've seen an inflationary cycle that I've never seen in my lifetime. It's worse than any short-term inflation cycle that this country has faced, at least in my lifetime. And I was born in the late 80s, let's just say 1990 and moving forward. So I bring that up because this is some pretty bad inflation that the world and that the United States has seen. And we don't need to get into all the details about how it happened or the mistakes that were made at the time, when the Fed should have started raising rates, when the government should have stopped spending. That's all history. Moving forward, I'm actually very optimistic now that we've actually reached peak inflation. And when I say peak inflation, I mean during this microcycle where inflation has gone back up from a 2.4% rate to a 3% rate. I think that's the highest we're going to get during this micro cycle. It did reach I believe it was above 9% in 2022.
Yes.
We're definitely not gonna reach that, but 3% is still too high for the Federal Reserve. It's still too high for Americans. It's a major reason why Americans went to the voting booths or the ballot boxes and made the decisions that they made because of inflation. It's the most important issue on most Americans' minds. And I bring this up because I'm very optimistic that we've seen this 3% peak and that we're going to be going down moving forward because of the first half of this interview. The fact that all of a sudden, it is a sudden thing because a lot of people weren't expecting this. I was, but a lot of people weren't expecting these mass government layoffs, and these mass government layoffs, they hit corporations, they hit private businesses. Anyone with a government contract is going to be hit. Anyone who was profiting off of waste, fraud, abuse, which you'll be surprised how many private, and many of the time this is legal, like it's legal waste, it's legal abuse. And all of a sudden those checks are going to stop coming in, or the way of doing those business practices are going to stop because the government is clamping down on it. Why? Because it's taxpayer money and taxpayers are upset. So the pullback or the elimination of waste, fraud, abuse is definitely a good thing. But also the mass layoffs, we're going to see a decrease in aggregate demand. And when we see a decrease, or I'll just say demand, I mean, that's more common. So we'll see a decline in demand. So when there's a decline in demand, what happens? Prices go down. And we're already seeing it. There's already proof of it. I brought up the housing market in the DMV area, and I can also tell you oil prices, for example, which is one of the main drivers of inflation. Oil and gas energy prices, one of the top 3 drivers along with government spending. So you got mass layoffs, which will kill a lot of that aggregate demand. You have the oil, gas, and energy, and then the reduction in government spending. So all that combined is going to lower inflation. Going back to the energy prices, oil is down for really since the inauguration. That trend should continue given the policy change, and that drives inflation, it drives deflation, it drives pricing, because any good that you need, it's probably going to be transported with the use of energy. The microphone you're using, Keith, how was it shipped? Maybe in a truck, and the truck is powered by fuel, or maybe something was sent in an airplane or in an actual ship. All that requires energy and fuel. So if you can lower energy costs, then we're going to see a continued decline in inflation, and energy costs continue to fall, continue to plummet. So I think this is good for inflation. Yes, it is. There is pain. We talked the first entire half of this episode on layoffs. They're painful. Taking that walk of shame is painful. There is going to be pain, but at the same time, remember, there are more than 10 million available private sector jobs, and we already have more than 1 million jobs that are opening up as a result of investment within the United States since January 20th of this year. We have companies like Apple, we have Taiwan Semiconductor, Eli Lilly. The list goes on and on and on of major corporations, big corporations, mid-sized companies who are opening up more operations within the United States. So the private sector jobs, which are really the innovative, long-lasting jobs, they are growing. There's just a tremendous opportunity, especially for young people. If I was young again, I wouldn't want to work for the government. I'd want to go work for one of these companies where they're essentially going to be recruiting and begging youngsters to come work for them.
To corroborate Naresh's lower inflation expectations, since the beginning of the year, we've had a fairly sharp decrease in bond yields. Now, GRE listeners know by now that mortgage rates somewhat move with Jerome Powell's federal funds rate, but they're more closely tied to bond yields, specifically the yield on the 10-year T-note. Okay, so then what makes the 10-year go lower, hence mortgage rates along with them? That is lower inflation expectations in a slowing economy. And another reason that bond yields and hence mortgage rates with them fall is when people sell stocks and make a flight to safety into bonds. That pushes up bond prices and lowers bond yields. So again, those are two factors that move bond yields and resultantly mortgage rates, and that's what has been happening.
Absolutely. And the important thing to remember, something you touched on and what I talked about earlier, which is, yes, there is going to be a reduction in federal government and federal government jobs. And I think this is going to pass on to states as well. I think many states, in fact, I know that many states, even blue states, are taking a look at their books and saying, hey, you know what, we should be making cuts too, because states, they operate on much tighter budgets, whereas the federal government, they basically have access to a printing press. State governments do not. So the point that I'm making here is that, yes, it's painful. We're going through some pain right now. The DMV area is going through some pain. The stock market has gone through some pain. The crypto markets have gone through some pain. Everyone's gone through some pain. But they say no pain, no gain. And the jobs are being transferred, as I brought up earlier, from the government sector to the private sector. And the private sector is where we can see tremendous growth. Look at GRE, for example. We're a private company and we've seen tremendous growth, right? Tremendous growth in just innovation and our services and our offerings. Now imagine a bigger company that and how much growth they can have. I think overall, I'm very optimistic about inflation coming down, hitting that 2% target by the end of this year. In fact, I think it'll hit that 2% target a few months before the end of the year. And once we hit that target, then the Fed is going to start cutting rates again. And there's a chance that they may even start cutting rates before we hit that 2% target. I don't think they should. I thought they made a mistake doing that last year when they started cutting when inflation hit 2.4%, I think, or 2.5%. They started cutting again. I think the inflation rate has to hit actually 2% across the board, and then they can start with their gradual cutting. So if somebody asks today, hey, Naresh, and which many do, they ask, hey, how low do you think interest rates are going to go this year? My answer is not very low this year. You'd have to have a cataclysmic black swan event, which it's called black swan because none of us can predict it. None of us can see it. So you'd have to have an event like that for the Fed to just basically slash rates overnight, which I don't see anytime soon. The other most popular question I've gotten this week is, are we going to go into a recession? You know, it seems like the world is falling apart and World War III and stocks are tanking and crypto is tanking and this is tanking and that's tanking. This is what people told me a few weeks ago, actually. And my answer is, no, I don't think we're going to see a recession unless there's a black swan event, but I don't think so. And the reason is because of the tool that the Fed has. The Fed can cut. That's one of the benefits. Now, if we were at low interest rates, if we were at, let's say, historic low interest rates, and we were in this situation today, I would be very pessimistic and say it's not looking good. But any sign of a recession, the Fed is going to act at their next meeting. They won't even need to call an emergency meeting. They'll act at their next meeting, whenever that may be. They'll act and start cutting rates, and that's going to quickly stimulate the economy and get investors like our folks, because that's going to affect the bond yields, that's going to affect the mortgage rates, and investors are going to jump in to buy real estate, and people are going to jump in to buy discounts in the stock market, et cetera, et cetera.
To your point, Thank goodness the Fed has some ammo. Since the federal funds rate is about 4%, they do have some ammo and they can cut that rate down. You can imagine if the Fed funds rate was zero, like it was a few years ago, and they couldn't make cuts because they don't want to take it negative. So Naresh and I here are talking about a number of forces that are largely outside your control. So these are the sort of things you can keep your eye on. However, there is something you can do that's very much in your control, and it happens this Thursday, where you can join Naresh and a co-host on our upcoming live event. Tell us about it, Naresh.
Yes, well, like you said, it's this Thursday. We're going to be talking about the BRRRR strategy, which has become the most popular real estate investment strategy GRE has seen in its existence. Our investors are almost hooked onto this BRRRR strategy. We're going to talk more about it on the webinar. BRRRR stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. And we'll get into all that in the webinar. It's a great way to build equity in a property very quickly and to use that equity towards your down payment so that you're not paying that standard traditional 20 to 25% down. Some of our investors have done BRRRRs in markets like Tennessee where they put zero down, or where they even made money on the, if you want to call it, the flip. So we're going to be talking about that. It's specifically geared towards, we've done a BRRRR event before on the Memphis, Tennessee market. This is a BRRRR online event that covers the Cleveland, Ohio market. And that's a market that we have not touched on much here at Get Rich Education. We've promoted some properties here and there. It's a really popular market, and it's a state that is growing and looking. If someone were to ask me, hey, Naresh, what's the one state that you think can become the next Florida? And we've covered Florida here before. I live in Florida. Politics aside, Florida has boomed since 2020 or so. The number of, how you can judge a state's growth is by its GDP numbers, and most importantly, are people moving there? That's the key. Are people moving there? And I would say Ohio is that next state where I think many people in the Midwest are going to say, hey, you know what? I want to go move there, because they're looking to make a lot of changes that are pro-growth, that are pro-real estate, including potentially eliminating the property tax, school choice programs there. That's huge for kids. Universal school choice, and most importantly, potentially eliminating the income tax. Now, these are all long-term plans. This is not happening anytime soon, but those are the visions and the goals for Ohio. And I think they're going to happen by 2030. I would expect many of these plans and policies to happen. And what that means for real estate is it's going to boom, because people are going to move to Ohio because of that. There aren't a lot of states that offer no income tax. So those are my thoughts on Ohio, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the webinar.
Many expect Vivek Ramaswamy to be the next governor of Ohio. If that comes true, Vivek has a lot of the same pro-business policies that Ron DeSantis does. In Florida, for example, Ohio has a high population, a stable population, America's seventh largest population, and a slow-growing one with a great diversity of industry there in Ohio and Cleveland.
So Keith, we're approaching record numbers of registrations for this event. We still have room for several more people. So I highly recommend people go to grewebinars.com. That's grewebinars.com. You can register for the event. It's going to be fun. All of our webinars recently have been a ton of fun. We've gotten great feedback, a lot of engagement. I think you'll learn a lot for sure. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody there.
Your co-host, Phil, was on last week's show with us. Both you and Phil will be talking about this BRRRR live event in Cleveland. I really suggest you, the listener, attend live. You might get a better property selection that way, and you'll surely be able to ask questions. And sometimes with the other participants, they ask a really good question that you had not even thought of previously. It's our live BRRRR event for Cleveland cash flow properties. You, the listener, probably remember when Phil was here last week, we gave an example of where you can get 8-to-1 leverage and up to $500 cash flow on a single family home in Cleveland. I really recommend that you attend, and you'll be hearing more from Naresh then. You can sign up at grewebinars.com. We'll see if we break that record of, I think, 538 registrants last webinar that we had late last year. Do you have any last thoughts about the event, Naresh?
like I said before, our events it's free to attend. That's the first thing. You don't need to pay us anything, but we sell out these events. So I highly recommend that people go once again to grewebinars.com. We can only hold a certain number of people. It's a few hundred people. So we want to sell out again. We hope you can join us and you will not regret. I think you're going to really like the Cleveland market. We're going to talk more about that, the Ohio market in general. And I think folks are really, really going to like this strategy. I know a lot of you have invested in BRRRR in other markets or have been researching BRRRR and you really like what you hear. This is the market I think that you should pay really, really close attention to. Our team is really strong there. Phil's team, really strong, very honest. They're quick, they're reliable. So if you've had a bad experience doing a BRRRR elsewhere, I think you'll have a better experience with our team over here.
We'd call it a sellout crowd, but you don't have to pay anything. We'd call it a standing room only crowd, but you don't have to stand up. You can sit down and enjoy it from the comfort of your own home this Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern at grewebinars.com. Thanks for coming on to the show, Naresh.
Thanks a lot, Keith.
Yeah, strong insights from our own Naresh today. Inflation expectations cut back and forth like a knife with big policy decisions on layoffs and tariffs and more. Tariffs on lumber and gypsum board, they are two of the major inputs that can increase the cost of homes. Gypsum board just means drywall. Tariffs slow trade. Less fuel is used to ship things like we touched on. And a lot of people ask, well, doesn't an economic slowdown mean lower prices? But yet don't tariffs raise prices? Well, you got to take on that from Naresh today. Now, sometimes I am asked, where is the real opportunity in today's real estate market? I've been a guest on other business shows lately, and I've been asked that question. Where's the opportunity in today's real estate market? And I've got two answers. If you have more money and less time, go with new build properties because builders are still awarding you with massive rate buydowns, often to near a 5% mortgage rate. They are buying it down for you. But instead, if you have less money and more time because you have to wait a few months for a rehab, then go with the BRRRR strategy. That is the other opportunity. It's going to give you a higher return than new build in most cases because what you get is an improbably high leverage along with strong cash flow. And those are two notions that typically don't go together. Well, on Thursday, we're bringing that to you with our live event. Is there a more seasoned pro with the BRRRR strategy in the entire nation than one co-host for the event, Phil, and then the mind spring of knowledge and ideas from Naresh as the other co-host. And they're both active investors themselves, bringing you the opportunity in Cleveland in just a few days. And of the hundreds of registrants, not all of them attend live, but do attend live if you can. Give yourself an advantage. You can be connected with available properties conducive to the BRRRR strategy if you're interested, or maybe you're just more interested in how it all works. One last time, it is GRE's live event for Cleveland's amazing cash flow opportunities this coming Thursday, the 20th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Healthy, real-world monthly rents that are more than 1% of the purchase price. Single-family properties, many for under $100K in investor sweet spots. It's free to attend. It's from the comfort of your own home. Registration is still open at grewebinars.com. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
Whenever you want the best written real estate and finance info, oh, geez. Today's experience limits your free articles access, And it's got paywalls and pop-ups and push notifications and cookies disclaimers. It's not so great. So then it's vital to place nice, clean, free content into your hands that adds no hype value to your life. That's why this is the golden age of quality newsletters, and I write every word of ours myself. It's got a dash of humor, and it's to the point because even the word abbreviation is too long. My letter usually takes less than 3 minutes to read, and when you start the letter, you also get my 1-hour fast real estate video course. It's all completely free. It's called the Don't Quit Your Daydream letter. It wires your mind for wealth, and it couldn't be easier for you to get it right now. Just text GRE to 66866. While it's on your mind, take a moment to do it right now. Text GRE to 66866. The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.